Hello, world history students. This is Mrs. Politsky, and I have your notes for Chapter 29, Section 2, Nationalism in Africa and Asia, with our focus today being on Africa. So let's begin. Number one, the desire for self government, which is basically the people of Africa ruling over themselves, and nationalism, which is kind of pride in your people or pride in the nation that you are from, led many peoples to seek independence from the British and the French. And some of this came a little bit after World War One, but many of the nations of Africa wouldn't gain full independence until after World War Two in the late 1940s. So, with the withdrawal of colonial powers from their colonies and areas of influence is called decolonization. And because primarily World War II was such a very costly war to places like France and Great Britain, economically it seemed maybe a little bit more reasonable for these European powers to pull their interest out of these colonies and to allow the people of Africa to have self rule. And number three, the first British colony to achieve independence was the Gold Coast, which was eventually renamed Guyana. Guyana achieved its independence when the British decided to hold elections for a national assembly. Eventually, we're going to see Khmer, uh, uh, Narukrum, who his party won eventually the majority and embarked on a campaign of self government and independence. What's unique is when he came to power, and many other rulers throughout the independent nations of Africa. One of the things that they wanted to bring back is this African identity to their nations. And when he appeared with his cabinet, he made sure to dress not in Western clothing, but the fabrics of traditional Afrikaners. So, after the British granted the colony full independence, this all kind of really took place. In Kenya, you had a rebel insurgency against white settlers. It was kind of violent. Matter of fact, kind of dangerous for some of the white settlers who had been there for a significant period of time. But as a result of that, the British are going to kind of back away and allow for the people of Kenya to kind of have power. People in the French colonies were given the choice and granted independence. When we talk about the Portuguese and Belgian colonies, they had difficulty achieving independence because they hung on to the colonies until violence forced them to decolonize. And some of this wasn't happening until the 1960s and beginning of the 1970s. Portugal colonized Angola, the Portuguese Guinea, and Mozambique, while Belgium had colonized the Belgium Congo, which would eventually be uh, renamed Zaire and then eventually named the Democratic Republic of Congo. Portugal ultimately withdrew from Africa due to war and the fact that a military coup or a coup d'etat, which is like a military takeover, usually happening very quickly, had drained Portugal's economy, and hence they couldn't afford to keep their colonies. In South Africa, the Afrikaners, who were the descendants of the Dutch and the other European settlers, they fought to keep Black Africans from participating in South Africa's government. And they established a policy, but it actually goes before 1948, but it takes on this name in 1948, known as apartheid, which is a segregation law, a law designed to keep the races separate from one another. The thing about apartheid is that it is multi layered. When you think about Jim Crow laws that happened in the United States, primarily it was kind of a black white thing. But when we look at apartheid, you have to look at the different peoples that were living in South Africa. You still had people of a European descent, but you also had people that were coming from Asia, primarily places like India. And so the people from India were considered to be colored, but they were not considered to be black Africans. But yet they were still segregated under this policy of apartheid. The word apartheid means apartness. And this policy is going to go on until the 1990s. And it certainly basically allowed something unusual to happen. Typically, when you have a country where the majority of the people um, are of a certain descent, you would think that they would have control over their government. But a minority of people, in this case in South Africa, who were white, Afrikaners or British, were the ones who ruled the government. And yet, they had difficulties at times because of the fact that they ruled over people who were not happy with their policies. In number 12, people had to live in different areas as a result of apartheid. They attended separate social gatherings. They could only hold certain jobs. Um, certain jobs for blacks were forbidden, uh, and so that certainly adds to the complications here. There was little or no protection by the law. So if a black African who uh, might have been accused of a crime had to go to court, chances are the jury would be all white. And more likely, they were going to rule against somebody who was racially not the same race as them. So at some point in time, there are going to be people outside of South Africa that are going to notice this injustice. And there's a kind of a poster here that kind of shows kind of people's I guess you could say, the descent to the apartheid movement. And what you're going to find is that certain nations are going to boycott South Africa until they change their policies. Thank you very much.